Imagine a global game of Go being played out right on the map of Europe. Think of it like a slow strategic encirclement, piece by piece. Today, we're taking a deep dive into how a major global power is strategically engaging with Europe and what that really means for all of us. Our mission is to extract the most important insights from, well, a stack of incredible sources. We want to help you understand the subtle, yet pretty profound ways this engagement unfolds. We're talking complex economic maneuvers, sophisticated influence operations, and also how Europe is maybe slowly beginning to adapt. Look, this isn't just about the headlines you skim. It's about seeing the intricate threads that connect events that might seem totally separate. It's about understanding the truly long game being played here.
It is an intricate tapestry, absolutely, woven with, I'd say, immense strategic patience. We're looking at a strategy that goes, far beyond simple trade deals or those standard diplomatic visits. Our sources, they lay out a really compelling picture of a concerted, deeply thought out effort to, well, fundamentally reshape the international landscape. And that GOE analogy, I think it provides the perfect lens to really understand how it's all unfolding.
Absolutely. And, to truly grasp this grand strategy and its sweeping vision for Europe, our sources introduce that fascinating analogy. The ancient board game of Go. For those of you maybe not familiar with it, Go is, well, vastly different from chess. In chess, right, all the pieces are on the board from the start, and the objective is pretty direct attack, capture the king. But Go, the board starts empty. Pieces are added one by one as the game progresses. And the objective isn't that direct confrontation. It's more about strategically encircling, influencing, um, controlling more territory than your opponent, building strength through connections. It's a game of grand strategy, operational art, and tactical battles, all happening at the same time. Our sources suggest this parallels exactly how this major global powers engagement in Europe has developed and, frankly, continues to unfold piece by piece, gradually expanding influence and control.
Yeah, and what's crucial here, I think, is that this is far from just a random series of actions. It's not haphazard. This engagement in Europe is described as like an advanced state of play in an encirclement strategy. It's meticulously funded, orchestrated by its governing party leadership. Think of it as a centrally directed effort. The party can compel state-owned enterprises, major corporations, even individual researchers to align their investment strategies and activities with these long-term national goals.
Wow.
Yeah, it allows for this choreographed, whole-of-nation effort to achieve specific strategic outcomes globally. It creates a coherent front that's honestly pretty hard for individual democratic states to counter effectively.
And it's so much more than only about investments and acquisitions, isn't it? I mean,
Mhm.
those often grab the headlines. But our sources make it abundantly clear that this strategy is profoundly about influence, about the sophisticated employment of soft power. Just look at the sheer scale of involvement cited in our materials. Massive business acquisitions right across critical sectors, energy, advanced technologies, healthcare, and increasingly incredibly sensitive high-tech industries.
Critical areas.
Then you have these monumental infrastructure projects physically linking regions together. Extensive academic collaborations that will open doors to knowledge, research and development agreements, often loaded with specific conditions, and even widespread sponsorship of influential think tanks and cultural institutions. All these seemingly disparate activities are, in fact, really tightly wound threads in a much larger, cohesive Go-style strategy. Each piece placed with a very specific purpose in mind.
And when we connect this to the bigger picture, the overarching goal driving all these activities is what the sources consistently refer to as national rejuvenation.
Hmm.
The stated aim is to achieve the great rejuvenation of the nation by 2049. Now, this isn't just about economic growth or becoming wealthy. It's framed as a profound, almost spiritual, long-term ambition.
Spiritual, that's interesting.
Well, in the sense of national destiny, perhaps. The goal is to match or surpass leading global influences, fundamentally displace existing alliances, particularly in key regions like the Indo-Pacific, and comprehensively revise the international order to be more advantageous to its authoritarian system and its national interests. It's a vision of becoming the world's preeminent nation within 3 decades. Timed perfectly, to coincide with the centennial anniversary of the establishment of its governing party state. It's very much an ideological drive as much as an economic one.
And they seem to possess a distinct competitive advantage in pursuing this national rejuvenation, what our sources call this unity of effort and purpose. A disciplined autocratic regime, it seems, can coherently integrate all elements of its national power, economic, diplomatic, informational, military, to pursue one comprehensive strategy.
Exactly.
This allows them to make decisions faster, marshal vast resources much more quickly, and crucially, stay the course over a far longer period than, say, disparate democratic governments. We, on the other hand, are often constrained by, well, shorter political cycles, complexities of building public consensus, sometimes competing domestic priorities.
Yeah.
It can make a unified long-term response incredibly challenging.
Precisely. This inherent strategic coherence, woven into the regime's orchestrated strategy, is designed to achieve that shared vision. It's like a single mind guiding every move in a complex Go game, and this long-term perspective also endows them with, well, profound strategic patience. It enables the employment of indirect approaches. Instead of direct force, the aim is often to weaken opponents through wisdom, through subtle pressure, insidiously employing various activities to undermine the ability and the will of others to resist,
Yeah.
all while enhancing the regime's relative power and influence. It's often hidden in plain sight, as the sources say, within complex economic choreography. This makes it particularly effective at pitting competing priorities and even allies against one another. It's a slow, steady erosion, not some sudden assault.
And underpinning all of this is a fundamental worldview, isn't it? One that perceives the current international system as being in direct opposition to its own authoritarian system. Our sources really highlight that the governing party views the existing global order, with its emphasis on liberal democracy and open markets, as frankly an unacceptable impediment to its long-term objectives. They genuinely seem to perceive the system as rigged against them, which in their view further justifies their aggressive revisionist approach to international relations. It seems like a deep-seated conviction shaping every strategic decision.
Oh, absolutely. And this perception heavily influences their economic strategy. The sources clearly illustrate how European investments and acquisitions are visibly aligned to directly support the Made in China 2025 Industrial Master Plan. This plan is explicitly aimed at making the country a technology superpower by dominating 10 critical high-tech sectors, think robotics, biotechnology, aerospace, things like that. So when they invest in, say, a European robotics company, it's not just about the profit motive. It's about acquiring intellectual property, skilled talent, market access, things that directly feed into their national industrial strategy. It saves them years, potentially, of costly domestic R&D.
And that leads right into that crucial point about past exploitation of vulnerabilities. Our sources meticulously detail the experience where businesses, particularly from Western nations, effectively transferred intellectual property and core technological know-how just as a condition for market access.
Yeah, the price of entry.
Exactly. And this effectively saved years, maybe even decades, of costly R&D for the governing party. The perception from their side was apparently that this was due to a certain sloppiness in Western approaches, maybe a focus on quick returns, on market share, over long-term strategic foresight. This short-sightedness, arguably, allowed them to gain technological insight across countless business sectors, propelling their economy forward at an unprecedented pace, something they'd likely have struggled to achieve entirely on their own.
And this long-term integrated strategic patience, this commitment to a go approach, is such a significant contrast to how many democracies operate, isn't it? Democracies often focus on shorter political or economic cycles. This fundamental difference is coupled with, well, a demonstrated disdain for rules and agreements they find inconvenient. Consider their actions in the South China Sea. They simply rejected an international ruling by the Permanent Court of Arbitration that declared their claims unlawful and just continued building artificial islands. Or their disregard for fundamental human rights, like the suppression of Uyghurs, which has proceeded unchecked despite widespread international condemnation. These aren't isolated incidents. They demonstrate a pattern of behavior where rules seem secondary to strategic objectives.
It's clear that as a major global economy, its role in the, let's call it the economic battle space, is just indisputable. Our critical dependence on its supply chains became strikingly, maybe painfully evident during the global pandemic. Remember trying to find masks, medicines. Essential goods were largely sourced from there. That period really should have served as a wake-up call for many, highlighting the serious implications of such deep economic reliance and its profound effect on, say, Europe's strategic autonomy. These actions, when you look at them all together, really underscore the seriousness of the situation we're discussing. So we've laid out this grand strategic vision. Let's now peel back the layers and see how this actually manifests on the ground in Europe, particularly through its multi-domain influence operations. How exactly do these threads weave together to advance those long-term goals? Our sources reveal a strategy that's both sophisticated and deeply integrated across various fronts. One key area seems to be the weaponization of economic coercion. And this isn't just about traditional trade disputes, is it?
Not at all. It's a deliberate strategy to create fiscal dependencies, particularly with individual countries that might be in economic need. By offering attractive, often quite opaque, deals for infrastructure or investment, they create powerful leverage down the line.
And this leverage extends directly to supply chains.
Yeah.
Like a Go player cutting off an opponent's vital lines of connection.
Exactly. The sources describe how direct pressure is exerted on companies, sometimes even companies outside the directly targeted country, telling them to avoid components from nations that take actions deemed unfavorable. For instance, we saw this play out with the Swedish telecom giant Ericsson. They were reportedly lobbied pretty hard to pressure their own government to reverse a ban on Chinese competitors like Huawei and ZTE.
Really?
Yeah, with threats to move operations out of Sweden if the ban remained. It's a powerful, indirect way to force compliance through corporate channels.
And a truly stark and quite recent example of this economic coercion is that campaign against a specific European state, all because of its diplomatic decisions regarding a certain entity. That country faced immediate and severe pressure. Things like being delisted as a country of origin, effectively blocking all trade, shipping containers literally turned away at ports,
Unprecedented, really.
and a very public warning to other companies against using components from that targeted nation. The real bite, though, was the pressure put on other European companies. German automakers were mentioned, to avoid using components from that targeted nation. That created significant disruption and costs right across wider European supply chains. It was an attempt to weaponize that interconnectedness, to pressure the broader European business community to self-censor and comply.
Beyond economics, there's a powerful effort to control the narrative, especially in the informational domain. Our sources reveal significant investments in European media outlets, a reported $3.5 billion in recent years. And this has led to a demonstrable shift. Independent studies show a clear correlation between these investments and a move away from balanced or even negative or neutral reporting towards only positive coverage in some instances. It's a direct means of shaping public perception, ensuring a favorable narrative, like securing vital information hubs on the Go board.
And this isn't just subtle influence, is it? It's described as industrial-scale disinformation. Interference campaigns and disinformation are amplified, particularly by social media, just because it's cheap, global, and scalable. Many of these activities push, maybe even cross, legal boundaries. And while governments are increasingly aware, they often seem to struggle to respond adequately, maybe due to a fundamental lack of understanding of the tactics or just fragmented jurisdictional responses across the continent.
A core mechanism for this, mentioned prominently in the sources, is the United Front Work, or UFW. Now, these aren't just cultural exchange groups. They're described as dedicated organizations overseeing influence operations. They leverage economic ties, they co-opt influential people in business and politics, and they actively promote self-censorship, their key objective, to ensure that narratives, third-party decisions, and policies regarding the country align perfectly with its party's interests. And the UFW uniquely benefits from the very factors that make for a thriving free society, a free press, a pluralistic political system, a broad array of civil society institutions. They essentially exploit our openness against us.
And then there's the wolf warrior diplomacy we hear about, that aggressive, coercive diplomatic style, particularly visible on social media. It's used to directly attack critics, bully governments, and exploit the inherent vulnerabilities of open democratic systems. We've seen instances where diplomats attacked lawmakers and researchers over human rights issues or overtly bullied governments into restricting their own press. It seems designed to silence opposition and make open societies self-censor, maybe out of fear of economic or diplomatic retribution.
In the diplomatic and political domain, our sources detail what's often termed elite capture. This involves the systematic creation of networks of business and political elites who are friendly to the country's interests. Funding think tanks is another key strategy here. It serves to promote favorable narratives and business arrangements that ultimately benefit the governing party. Their ability to exploit seams and vulnerabilities in Western governments and business sectors allows seemingly innocuous engagements like a cultural exchange or a research partnership to subtly entrench shadow efforts, increasing influence within key industries and aspects of society without any overt confrontation.
And this extends powerfully down to the subnational level, right? Engaging local governments.
Yes, our sources highlight a deliberate strategy of targeting subnational and local governments with often lucrative proposals for infrastructure, technology, or investment. This creates pressure, from below on national policies. By the time national security authorities become aware, it can be incredibly difficult to stop these initiatives without, overstepping administrative and legal boundaries or risking a local economic backlash. They also actively create regional groupings like the now rebranded 14+1 format, which seems aimed at fracturing European unity, allowing them to deal with individual nations rather than the bloc as a whole, divide and conquer, essentially.
Okay, moving into the technological and security domains. There are significant inroads here, too, mirroring those strategic acquisitions we talked about earlier. The focus seems to be on securing access and influence. We see concerns about the installation of advanced facial recognition technology and high-tech surveillance systems. Serbia's Safe City project is mentioned as an example. While presented as, say, crime prevention tools, these systems raise serious alarms about potential requirements for companies to relay data back to intelligence services, creating potential backdoors and surveillance capabilities.
And this goes hand in hand with pervasive cyber activities. Our sources cite government-attributed cyber activities targeting a vast array of industries globally: healthcare, finance, defense, energy, IT, education. The explicit aim is often stealing intellectual property and sensitive data, including critical research related to, for instance, pandemic responses. It's a vast, coordinated effort to acquire valuable information and technology without the cost and time of developing it themselves, like capturing vital resource points on the Go board.
Furthermore, there are growing concerns about foreign military access to, well, tactical knowledge.
Yes, the sources mention the People's Liberation Army leveraging attendance at European professional military education courses and other military-to-military activities. The goal seems to be learning from allied nations what perhaps cannot be learned directly from other global powers. This raises profound questions about the implications of dual-use technologies, those with both civilian and military applications for their military modernization. These are issues that need addressing at both national and regional levels, likely through enhanced legislation and export control mechanisms.
So, okay, let's just break this down for a moment. It's clearly not just about traditional state-to-state relations. It's a much broader, deeply integrated effort to shape perceptions and policies across, well, everything: military, economic, informational, diplomatic spheres. It's like a total strategic engagement.
Absolutely. It's a whole-of-society approach directed by a party state. And that contrasts sharply with the often fragmented, compartmentalized approaches of many democratic nations, which typically separate, say, military matters from economic or academic domains.
Right. Now, let's turn our attention to Europe's specific vulnerabilities and some concrete cases of influence. Because our sources highlight that these aren't just theoretical concerns, they're playing out in real time across the continent. One of the most glaring general vulnerabilities seems to be the inherent openness of democratic societies themselves. This very openness, which is a cornerstone of our values and a source of strength, is explicitly exploited by a system that, frankly, doesn't share those values.
Compounding this is that deep economic dependence we touched upon earlier. The post-pandemic landscape has starkly underscored the reliance on trade and investment, creating powerful drivers for continued engagement even when strategic concerns exist. This economic pull can be incredibly difficult for individual nations to resist, leading to what some are now describing as a Faustian bargain.
A Faustian bargain.
Yes, the growing realization that continued economic dependence, if it comes at the expense of core liberal democratic values and long-term security, is simply no longer sustainable. It's a very difficult trade-off.
And there's also the challenge of strategic incoherence within Europe itself. European nations have incredibly diverse national interests, different historical legacies, unique economic priorities. It makes it extremely difficult to align them all for a unified, comprehensive response to a single long-term strategy from an outside power.
That disunity is a fundamental vulnerability, and it's actively identified and exploited, much like finding the weak points, the gaps in an opponent's territory on the Go board.
Okay, let's delve into some specific case studies within Europe, because these abstract concepts really come alive when you see them in action. Germany, for instance, it stands out, right? As China's largest trade partner and the primary destination for its foreign investment in Europe, we're talking over 25 billion euros in investments in 2020 alone. Its huge industries, particularly automotive and pharmaceutical, are heavily dependent on exports to and inward investments from this global power. This strong economic tie initially drove Germany's policy of Wandel durch Handel change through trade.
That was the hope, yes. But there's been a significant albeit gradual, shift in Germany's policy. Awareness of unfair trade practices, intellectual property appropriation, and frankly, dire human rights concerns has grown substantially within the political and business elite there. This has led to new legislation like rules obliging large German companies to check human rights compliance deep in their supply chains. And even the unprecedented deployment of a German naval presence in the Indo-Pacific that was a hugely significant and symbolic change in foreign policy stance. A real signal.
France is another key case, a major destination for foreign investment, and a huge export market, particularly for things like luxury goods and aircraft. Companies like Airbus have a significant market share there.
Right. But despite this economic importance, public opinion in France has apparently deteriorated quite sharply. This seems due to concerns over the handling of medical supplies during the pandemic and that aggressive wolf warrior diplomacy style we mentioned earlier.
Yet, even with this diplomatic friction, French leaders still aim to maintain good relations, don't they? Which just highlights that powerful economic pull. France also strongly promotes this vision of European strategic autonomy, emphasizing less reliance on any single global power, which, paradoxically, Beijing has expressed support for.
Interesting dynamic.
It raises internal questions, right, about the effects of foreign investment on strategic sectors, like electric car batteries, and how that could potentially influence national elections or vital national capabilities down the road. It's a very complex balancing act for them.
Hungary offers a particularly stark example of alignment and direct influence. As the very first European country to sign a memorandum on the Belt and Road program, that vast infrastructure and investment initiative, its leaders often align closely with Beijing on international issues. They frequently block critical EU statements on human rights or international rulings. This limited but strategically significant investment, particularly in large infrastructure projects like the Budapest-Belgrade rail line, seems to directly translate into political support and alignment within the EU framework.
And Hungary also has that controversial education project, the plan to host a satellite campus of a major foreign university, Fudan University in Budapest. This sparked widespread public protests, concerns over taxpayer costs, concerns about academic freedom, especially given the backdrop of a prominent liberal university, CEU, being controversially forced to relocate from Hungary just a few years prior.
Yes, that context is important. This move is seen by many critics as directly undercutting Hungary's own higher education system to advance a more illiberal agenda, with significant policy and financial commitments from the foreign power backing it.
Now, Greece. Still recovering from its protracted financial crisis, it saw foreign investment increase dramatically after 2008. This led to the acquisition of strategic assets like Piraeus Port 1 of Europe's largest at significantly low prices during the crisis.
Yeah.
Piraeus then became a key Belt and Road node, connecting the country with Europe by land and sea.
And that investment clearly translated into diplomatic and political influence. Greece often adopted supportive stances in international forums and was willing at times to block EU statements critical of the foreign power.
But that influence wasn't absolute, was it? Our sources suggest it met some limits when it collided with core national interests like cultural heritage or the social fabric.
That's right. There were instances where major construction projects linked to these investments were suspended because they threatened invaluable archaeological sites. Or efforts to weaken local port workers' unions met fierce resistance. It showed a nuanced balance. While the economic benefit is a powerful draw, there are still lines drawn when national identity or core interests are perceived to be threatened.
And Belgium. As the host of numerous EU institutions in Brussels, it's a direct and, you'd imagine, very attractive target for soft power and lobbying efforts.
Absolutely. The foreign presence there includes technology centers, research collaborations, active lobbying groups. Our sources highlight significant funding for Brussels-based think tanks, substantial cultural donations, the establishment of technology transparency centers, all designed, presumably, to shape the narrative and influence policy right within the heart of the European Union.
But Belgium has also seen some concerning security incidents that seem to go beyond just soft power.
Yes, incidents involving alleged espionage by academics with links to Belgian universities, reports of improper information passing by former EU officials, even the discovery of spyware and donated equipment. These incidents really underscore deeper security vulnerabilities within the EU's central hub, illustrating how economic and cultural engagement can sometimes mask more concerning intelligence activities.
So what's evident from all these cases, it seems, is a consistent pattern. while the economic incentives, the promise of capital, are incredibly alluring for individual nations.
Mm-hmm.
We see political and security considerations often following close behind, sometimes creating very difficult, very real dilemmas for these nations.
That's a key takeaway. The initial go moves of economic engagement are designed to create dependencies and influence, but these can then lead to pressure points that potentially undermine foundational democratic values and national sovereignty.
That's a crucial point. And understanding these patterns leads us directly to the critical concept of the hybrid threat model and how it specifically applies to this global power. Our sources explain that the post-Cold War security environment is characterized by this increasing fluidity, these blurred lines in the definitions of armed conflict and peaceful competition.
Right. The traditional lines between peace and war are definitely blurred. Actors are operating deliberately below traditional thresholds of conflict, making it hard to identify, attribute, and respond effectively.
This new environment also requires, according to the sources, a return to a whole-of-society security concept, sometimes called total defense.
Yes, it calls for comprehensive responses involving not just the military, but intelligence services, law enforcement, the media, the private sector, civil society. It's about recognizing that these threats target the entire fabric of society, aiming to undermine national resilience, not just military capabilities.
So how does this apply to the concept of a hybrid threat itself? How do our sources define that?
They define it as an actor possessing malign intent that deliberately combines and synchronizes non-military and military means to achieve specific objectives, to prime, destabilize, and coerce a targeted society. It's a deliberate, comprehensive approach aimed at undermining a society's will and ability to resist, using basically every tool available to create a cumulative effect.
And what are the key characteristics of this model?
Well, several stand out. The use of multiple synchronized tools to create both linear and nonlinear effects, meaning effects that build predictably and effects that appear suddenly or unexpectedly. Also, fostering ambiguity through covert action and plausible deniability. Deliberately manipulating thresholds to avoid triggering traditional countermeasures, like a military response. Exploiting societal seams like political divisions or economic inequalities and jurisdictional divisions between different government agencies or levels of government. And often including distraction elements where action in one domain, say the economic sphere, masks the true target elsewhere, perhaps in the political realm. It's a complex, multi-layered approach, making it incredibly challenging to detect and counter.
Okay, so when we apply this conceptual model, the profile of this global power as a hybrid threat actor becomes, well, strikingly clear. Its strategic culture and perceived malign intent seem deeply rooted in this belief in its manifest destiny to lead the world, driven by profound domestic concerns about political stability and economic success.
And that perception that the global system is rigged against them, which, in their view, legitimizes using these unconventional tactics to sort of level the playing field.
And this isn't entirely new, is it? It draws on historical precedent.
Well, yes. While there are ancient strategic philosophies, our sources note that many tactics used today have historical roots in previous authoritarian models, particularly drawing from Soviet traditions. The governing party itself rose to power using not just armed force, but methods we'd now call hybrid weakening opponents' resolve, controlling the information space. The assimilation of regions like Hong Kong is often cited as a modern example, demonstrating a sophisticated blend of legal, economic, and political pressure to achieve full integration below the threshold of overt force.
And Europe specifically seems like a tempting target for these hybrid threat activities, almost like a prime go-board for strategic encirclement.
Exactly. Its open market economies, democratic political systems, limited governmental authority. These make individual states, which are effectively medium-sized powers compared to its own strength, particularly susceptible to influence. Europe offers significant economic and technological opportunities to be exploited. And, maybe just as importantly, the widespread exposure of its own citizens to European values needs to be discredited internally to ensure cultural and political security back home.
The channels of influence seem incredibly broad, covering pretty much every domain.
They really do. In the economic domain, that deep integration makes European economies vulnerable to pressure. In the cyber domain, the interface is extensive from ICT infrastructure to data flows, with a clear focus on controlling global data storage and transmission. Elite capture, as we discussed, allows them to cultivate influential individuals in strategic positions. And that jurisdictional exploitation is rampant, approaching local authorities with proposals that bypass national security oversight, creating regional groupings to fracture European unity. It's comprehensive.
Our sources detail observable activities across this full spectrum. Priming societies, for example. What does that involve?
Priming is about laying the groundwork, like setting up pieces on the go board before the main action. It involves creating those economic dependencies, influencing media narratives, applying subtle pressure on academics, strategically owning key assets. It's about influencing decision makers and entire societies to remain passive or maybe react predictably to certain impulses. It's reminiscent of the Soviet theory of reflexive control, maneuvering an opponent into making a decision that benefits you without them fully realizing it.
And when influence fails, they move to interference.
Exactly. Those are the more attacking moves on the go board. This includes weaponizing economic power boycotts, administrative pressure, visa denials, denying access to raw materials, like we saw in that economic coercion campaign. It can also involve lawfare, using legal systems against an opponent, and broad propaganda campaigns, smearing legitimate criticisms as racist or politically motivated disinformation, ultimately aiming to undermine the credibility of democratic states and their institutions.
So really understanding this specific threat model helps us grasp the truly pervasive nature of this country's strategy. How it's not just a military threat, but a societal one that targets the very foundations of open societies.
Absolutely. It's about leveraging every single element of national power, seamlessly integrating non-military and military means to achieve strategic objectives without necessarily resorting to overt conflict, all while maintaining, or trying to maintain, plausible deniability.
So, okay, faced with such a comprehensive and persistent challenge, what are the countermeasures? What are the solutions for maybe achieving a more level playing field? Our sources are very clear that the first step is just a frank acknowledgement of the problem and recognizing the urgent need for collective action. The core issue, they say, is the difficulty democratic nations face in prioritizing collective interest over individual national interests. That constant tension between short-term economic gain and long-term strategic resilience.
The solution, then, has to be concerted and effective multilateral action. This is presented as crucial for preserving autonomy, prosperity, and frankly, our way of life. The sources draw powerful historical parallels, looking at lessons learned from past global challenges like post-World War II reconstruction or navigating the Cold War. They emphasize a need for spiraling up to a more coherently integrated approach, leveraging that collective experience of over 75 years of cooperative security and collective defense to face this new kind of challenge.
They propose a simple formula for success, don't they?
Yes, essentially. The combined resources of allied regions and partners must always outweigh the costs imposed by autocratic competitors. This requires shifting away from sporadic, reactive resource application towards targeted, sustained efforts. It means imposing robust firewalls against inappropriate intrusion, legal, economic, diplomatic firewalls, and focusing resources on reducing opportunities for competitors to weaken and unduly influence our societies.
And this demands coherently integrated actions, that truly whole-of-society approach to defense against these hybrid threats.
Yes, it calls for addressing subversive elements right across the private sector, civil society, and government. It emphasizes the absolute necessity of a unified front to prevent the exploitation of divisions among allies and within Europe itself. It requires resolute and unified action against coercive, illegal, and illiberal activities. And that means pushing past narrow national self-interest for the collective good.
And crucially, it means moving beyond that sometimes naive idea that economic engagement is always a win-win.
Right. Our sources point out that often leads to winning twice for one side. The solution includes requiring genuinely diversified supply chains, not just finding one new supplier, but systematically mapping dependencies, incentivizing domestic or allied production, and potentially absorbing short-term cost increases for long-term strategic resilience. This also means selective decoupling in highly strategic sectors, ensuring that democratic countries' businesses and national economies cannot be held hostage by a single external power.
Building knowledge capacity seems paramount too.
Absolutely. This involves significant investment in academic capacity for comprehensive study, not just language and culture, but deep economic, scientific, and security analysis. It also means actively reconsidering those foreign-funded cultural institutes and exploring cooperation with academic institutions in other democratic regions, maybe like those in Taiwan, as an alternative way to ensure academic freedom is safeguarded and research integrity is maintained.
And this calls for establishing dedicated centers, doesn't it? Both national and pan-European for full-spectrum monitoring and analysis of these activities.
Yes, the sources suggest models like the U.S.-China Economic and Security Review Commission, which provides nonpartisan analysis and recommendations to Congress. It shows that parliamentary platforms can also play a vital role in informing policy and public awareness. It's about building a shared collective intelligence picture of the threat.
Okay, so to effectively protect and resist, what's the first step? Defining strategic assets.
Precisely. First, clearly identify and then defend critical infrastructure and sensitive technologies. We're talking energy grids, healthcare systems, financial systems, communications networks, and crucial emerging technologies like AI, machine learning, and quantum computing. And untrustworthy vendors, especially those implicated in cyber espionage or IP theft, should simply be prohibited from supplying technologies to critical infrastructure providers, regardless of any perceived short-term cost savings.
Robust foreign direct investment, FDI, screening mechanisms seem absolutely essential too, to block harmful acquisitions that pose security risks.
Yes, the U.S. Committee on Foreign Investment, CFIUS, is often cited as a pioneer here. For listeners unfamiliar, CFIUS is a powerful interagency committee in the U.S. that reviews the national security implications of foreign investments. It has the authority to block deals or mandate changes. Its robust framework, often involving detailed intelligence assessments, offers a potential blueprint for emerging EU mechanisms.
Transparency schemes also sound critical, like shining a spotlight on those hidden go pieces.
Exactly. Our sources advocate for systems to monitor both financial and non-financial support flowing to political parties, media outlets, and NGOs from non-allied entities. This includes exposing hidden proxies and ensuring disclosure of relationships with third-country state actors. Models like the U.S. Foreign Agents Registration Act, FARA, or Australia's Foreign Influence Transparency Scheme are mentioned as successful precedents here.
And beyond that, establishing appropriate government bodies, dedicated roles specifically for economic security, seems vital.
Yes, Japan, for example, has introduced a cabinet-level position, the Minister for Economic Security, specifically to counter technology theft, coordinate supply chain resilience, and protect critical infrastructure. That signals a clear strategic prioritization right at the highest levels of government.
Finally, pushing back and ensuring accountability. What does that look like?
It means utilizing tools like human rights sanction systems. The Global Magnitsky Act framework, for instance, allows governments to sanction individuals or entities responsible for human rights abuses. Targeted sanctions against specific entities engaged in malign activities are also key. It also means strict rules enforcement. For example, delisting foreign companies from stock exchanges if they consistently fail to comply with auditing and disclosure requirements. That can fundamentally damage their financial interests and sends a very clear message about consequences.
Looking maybe medium to long term, simply protecting and reacting won't be enough, will it? Our sources highlight the need to overcome challenges proactively.
That's right. This includes forming new technology alliances, things like the Quad, Australia, India, Japan, US, or OU, Australia, UK, US, focused on advanced defense capabilities. And also the EU-US Trade and Technology Council, which aims to coordinate technology policy, set standards for commercial applications, and ensure the ethical use of emerging technologies like AI. These alliances are crucial for setting global norms and standards.
This also involves focused, coordinated government investment, doesn't it? In R&D, strengthening domestic supply chains, co-developing technologies through military procurement.
Yes, examples include significant investments we're seeing in quantum technology, microchip supply chains, securing domestic supply chains in critical fields like pharmaceuticals. These efforts are aimed at spearheading technological development and retaining global economic and technological leadership, ensuring that crucial innovations aren't easily outsourced or compromised.
What's particularly compelling here, I think, is how this isn't just about defensive measures. It's about proactively shaping the global order, demonstrating that the collective power of free peoples won't be undermined.
Exactly. It's about demonstrating that upholding universal values, human rights, liberty, democracy, the rule of law, is not a handicap in global competition, but actually a powerful strategic tool. This includes integrating responsible business conduct and human rights due diligence into all policies, even considering the export of things like cyber surveillance technologies.
Continuing our deep dive, our sources put a really sharp focus on higher education, seeing it as both a specific vulnerability and a key area of strategic engagement, almost like a critical intellectual territory on that go board.
Yes, education is clearly framed as a vital part of the broader national expansion strategy. There are significant policy and financial commitments aimed at taking a global lead in learning, research, and talent cultivation. The stated goal is ambitious, by 2035, to be among the most powerful nations globally in terms of learning, research output, and talent. Universities are viewed as crucial pipelines for achieving this.
But this ambition comes with significant concerns and risks for the host countries, doesn't it?
It does. We're talking about financial leverage through substantial investment in education initiatives, yes, but also very real security risks. Things like alleged espionage, persistent refusals to share research data from collaborative projects, the subtle undermining of academic freedom. And there are serious implications regarding dual-use technology adoption, where civilian research has potential military applications and widespread intellectual property theft within these academic collaborations.
And there are specific, often quite subtle influence mechanisms at play within academia itself. Those foreign-funded cultural institutes, often called Confucius Institutes, are a prime example.
Mm-hmm. Initially often seen as benign tools for promoting language and culture, they've faced increasing scrutiny globally regarding their potential political influence and impact on academic freedom. This has led to some closures in Europe, the US, and Australia. And even when governance is supposedly transferred to a non-governmental organization, the underlying concerns about influence and a potential lack of transparency often remain.
This raises a really critical question, then, for universities and governments alike. How do you ensure that academic collaboration remains open and mutually beneficial, while also safeguarding against these very real security risks and protecting core values like academic freedom?
The answer, as highlighted by our sources, seems to lie in evolving guidelines and frameworks. There's a clear shift towards establishing more comprehensive guidelines for university partnerships, driven by these increased security risks and growing negative public opinion in many places. Key principles emerging for academic engagement with foreign entities seem to be openness, yes, but also reciprocity, and a focused approach, meaning collaboration should be clearly defined, serve clear academic purposes, not just be broad, undefined cooperation agreements.
And that means developing practical tools for universities.
Exactly. Our sources highlight the creation of checklists and detailed guidelines to help universities assess the risks and benefits of collaboration proactively. This is about enabling universities to weigh potential academic and financial advantages against concerns like IP theft, inappropriate influence, or constraints on academic freedom. It also emphasizes the importance of fostering deep expertise in foreign studies within European universities themselves to better understand the nuances of these engagements, ensuring they aren't caught off guard.
Finally, we have to consider the impact of political polarization on academia itself in this context.
Yes, there's a real risk of political targeting of academics and civil society actors who engage critically with these sensitive issues. This carries significant security implications for those involved. The challenge for democracies is striking that delicate balancing act, addressing legitimate security concerns without alienating valuable partners or negatively affecting global competitiveness by hindering what could otherwise be truly valuable academic collaboration and scientific progress.
What's particularly striking here, I think, is that ongoing tension. The tension between the immense benefits of global academic exchange and the absolute imperative to protect intellectual property and fundamental academic freedoms. It really highlights a critical battleground in this broader strategic competition.
It's a microcosm, really, of the larger struggle. How to maintain an open society while simultaneously defending against malign influence and intellectual appropriation.
Okay, now let's circle back and put all these concepts into really sharp relief with a deep dive into that recent major test case of economic coercion, one against a specific European state. The catalyst for this, well, unprecedented campaign was the opening of a representative office by a certain entity in that country using a specific designation. This was apparently deemed to cross a bright red line by a major global power. This seemingly small diplomatic move unleashed a powerful retaliatory storm.
The escalation of coercion was incredibly swift and severe, like a rapid-fire go move designed to cut off an opponent completely. It began with diplomatic actions, withdrawing ambassadors, demanding diplomatic staff leave. But it quickly moved to severe trade blockades, delisting the country as a source for goods, effectively blocking all trade, literally turning away shipping containers at ports. And that stark warning to other companies against using any components from the targeted country. It was an all-encompassing economic blockade.
And while the direct economic impact on that smaller country was actually minimal, its exports to the global power were less than 1% of its total. The true strategic bite was the attempt to leverage those wider European supply chains.
The ripple effect.
Exactly. This created significant disruption and costs for other major European companies, particularly those with operations in the global power that relied on components from the targeted nation. It was an unprecedented move to pressure the broader European business community to self-censor and comply, effectively weaponizing that economic interconnectedness.
The response to this coercion involved both intense internal debate within the targeted country and, importantly, powerful external solidarity. Internally, politicians faced division. Public polling showed a shift in support for the initial stance as citizens felt the pressure. Even the president expressed doubts about the wisdom of the decision's specific naming, while the foreign minister maintained a firm position. It was clearly a true test of national resolve.
Externally, however, there was strong solidarity from regional alliances and other global powers.
Yes, this included the European Union filing trade dispute cases with the World Trade Organization. Offers of financial aid came through, credit programs to help offset losses for the targeted nation's businesses, and crucially, a major regional bloc unveiled a new anti-coercion instrument specifically designed to counter this kind of weaponization of trade and investment. This instrument would allow the bloc to impose duties, trade restrictions, even limit access to its internal market in response to economic blackmail from any country.
So what does this all mean for you, the listener? I think this case is just a stark example of how economic power can be, and is being, weaponized in the 21st century to achieve political ends. It also illustrates the critical importance of international solidarity when a smaller nation faces such disproportionate pressure. It shows that collective action and shared resilience are absolutely vital in resisting these tactics and protecting fundamental sovereignty.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, this particular episode really serves as a kind of live experiment in strategic deterrence. It highlights the profound challenges of achieving a unified response when faced with an actor willing to impose significant costs. And it underscores the urgent need for alternative, resilient supply chains and robust support networks among like-minded nations to withstand and counter such coercive campaigns effectively. It was a lesson learned in real time, the hard way for some.
As we begin to wrap up this deep dive, it's really essential to emphasize that this strategic challenge isn't going away. It's likely to persist and evolve. The hybrid methods we've discussed, from economic coercion and supply chain leverage to sophisticated influence operations, are deeply ingrained in the governing party's approach, both to its own society and to the world at large. And they're continually being enhanced by technological advancements. This is not a static threat. It's dynamic, constantly adapting, much like a skilled Go player finding new angles, new ways to encircle and gain territory.
And it remains crucial, I think, to maintain that clear distinction, the distinction between the country and its vast population and the governing party state itself. Cooperation with the country is both necessary and natural in many critical areas, think climate change, global health, pandemic prevention. But countering the malign hybrid threat activities orchestrated by the party state is absolutely essential for security and stability. This nuance is vital for effective policy and for public understanding. It's about discerning the player from the pieces on the board, if you will.
Which means there's a continuous ongoing need for Western societies to have a deep and current understanding of the governing party's mindset, its strategic objectives, the diverse tools it has available, and the potential vulnerabilities it can exploit across Europe and indeed beyond. It demands ongoing vigilance, continuous learning, and adapting our own responses in a world that is constantly shifting beneath our feet.
And finally, it really highlights the imperative for much better cross-domain collaboration on our side. We absolutely must bring together experts from widely different fields: economic strategists, military planners, cybersecurity specialists, academic researchers focusing on the region, civil society leaders tracking influence operations. We need them all talking to each other to achieve a complete holistic picture of this complex hybrid threat landscape. Overcoming the traditional silos, the divides between military and non-military spheres, between economic policy and national security, is paramount. Fostering a truly integrated, comprehensive societal response is the only way to effectively meet the challenge of a whole-of-nation strategy directed against us.
What really stands out here is, as you said, this isn't a static challenge. It's dynamic.
Yeah.
It's constantly evolving, and that demands ongoing vigilance and truly innovative responses from all of us, not just governments. So we've navigated this complex web of strategic engagement today. From that Go game analogy, which helps us see the long-term strategic patience involved, to the specific economic pressures, and that multi-layered hybrid threat model now being deployed across Europe, we've seen that understanding these dynamics isn't just for policymakers or intelligence analysts. It's really fundamental to being well-informed in today's incredibly interconnected world.
Hopefully, you now have a clearer picture of the sophisticated and comprehensive strategies at play, but also of the equally complex and sometimes halting responses emerging from democratic nations as they learn, sometimes slowly, to navigate this new era of strategic competition.
So maybe as you go about your day, Consider how the ideas we've discussed today might influence things you encounter. The everyday products you buy, where do their components come from? The digital platforms you use, who owns them? What data are they collecting? Even the news you consume, what perspectives are being highlighted or perhaps ignored? How might understanding this long game, this strategic encirclement and influence, change the way you interpret global events and national policies?
Keep asking those questions. Keep digging deeper into the often invisible forces that are shaping our world. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.